Miguel was then surprised to hear that Ian wanted to go to the center of the forest alone. Seeing his surprise, Ian just told him not to make him repeat his words. While Miguel was still hesitating, he then heard Philip's worried voice, who was worried about Maeve's current situation. Miguel then could only agree, and asked him to return safely, and Ian then went deep into the forest, while Miguel himself headed towards Maeve and Philip. Seeing that, Ian muttered, telling him to worry about himself. He was more worried about the two of them guarding Maeve. Ian then added oil to the torch to make it burn bigger. First, he had to attract the attention of the evil creature to him, but he was then surprised and complained about the heat when the flame burned bigger than he expected. By preparing his sword, also equipped with a torch and a small sword at his waist, Ian thought this should be enough. While Ian was going deeper into the forest and was about to face the ghouls, Miguel finally arrived at the position of the two of them. Seeing Philip, who continued to worry about Maeve's condition, Miguel then told him to wake up. He said, from now on, it was the two of them who had to protect the night, so he told him to be strong. Seeing the ghouls who rose from the ground and were about to run away from there, Ian then rushed to catch up. He was determined not to let them run away, and he then immediately sent a slash that managed to make the ghoul's body split into two. The ghouls seemed to be surprised to see him kill their kind so easily. As Ian was about to chase after the fleeing ghouls, a light suddenly shone on a nearby carnivorous tree, and the strange creatures he had faced so many times suddenly appeared and immediately pounced on him. But Ian didn't look panicked at all. He just said that they didn't give him EXP points, so he told them not to bother him, and he then immediately slaughtered them all. After Ian finished his slaughter, he then suddenly smiled, and said, "This must make you really angry, but you can't be angry just because of this. Because I've just started." There was absolutely no response to the words Ian said. It looked like he was talking to empty air. Ignoring that, Ian then accelerated to the center of the forest. He also ignored the ghouls that were in the way, and completely ignored them. A large hand suddenly stuck out on the ground in front of him, and a giant monster then appeared shortly after that. Seeing the giant monster roaring towards him, Ian just told it to be quiet and ignored it. He again rushed towards the center of the forest by ignoring the monsters. The giant monster was then angry to see him ignore it. It then immediately attacked Ian, who was speeding behind it, although the attack from the monster did not succeed in hitting him. But the attack made the torch in his hand broken. Ian then landed smoothly by rolling on the ground. Ian now realized that he could not underestimate the monster, because after all it was a named monster. He now also had no torch, but he then activated his unique trait, Sixth Sense, which made the surrounding area then clearly displayed in his eyes. After observing for a while, he then found the position of the mastermind who contaminated the forest, namely the boss monster Twisted Ancient Tree. But when Ian saw the carnivorous tree, he was surprised by its huge size. Because it had not been contaminated for a long time like in the game, he thought it would be smaller, but he then didn't think it was a problem. He just had to follow the plan. Finally, he could use this essence. When he took out the essence attracted his magic power like a magnet, but it also made him understand how it worked. But he then turned alert, when the carnivorous tree suddenly attacked towards him. But Ian was fortunately able to dodge the attack. Strange creatures then sprung from the carnivorous tree, but with a size much larger than he had faced before. Not giving him time to think, the strange creatures then immediately attacked towards him. Ian then felt annoyed at that. It really didn't give him time to think. The strange creatures simultaneously attacked towards him. Ian could only dodge when the creatures rained down on him. The effect of the creature's attack caused a very powerful effect around, although he could immediately attack back. But he didn't need to do it. Ian then took something from his dimension pocket. It was the oil he used to create a bigger flame in his torch earlier. Ian then sprinkled the oil towards the strange creature. After doing this action, Ian then casts fire magic, and burns the bag containing the oil. The effect of the two things colliding causes a very powerful blaze that burns around. The strange creatures can only struggle in pain when the fire burns them, until finally they can only surrender to death by fire. Seeing this, Ian has guessed that fire is the most powerful weapon against trees. Not only are the strange creatures burned, the carnivorous tree, which is the root of the creature, is also burned. Seeing this scene, Ian couldn't help but think, if he had read the blog about this strategy in the early days of playing the game, he wouldn't have learned grey magic in vain. He could only lament his precious skill points that were wasted. Come to think of it, he had already gotten a mark as a cursed character since then. After Ian observed the tree for a while, he then finally found its second weakness. While speeding towards it, Ian was annoyed because it was located in a very high place, and when Ian got closer, the tree suddenly released some kind of gas. Ian could only be surprised to see that. He then landed back on the ground, and the strange creature that had been burned, suddenly got up, then prepared to attack him again. Seeing that, Ian just grinned. He didn't look panicked at all, because he was waiting for its vapor escape technique, the vapor escape technique of the twister. Ancient tree, after releasing steam to kill the fire, it launched a strong area effect attack with its head. What was interesting here was the cooldown time between the two. In other words, it was the perfect time for a mage to cast the spell. With the essence in his hand, Ian then cast low-class Crimson Magic, Flamethrower. This was a melee magic attack, but if he increased the magic output by using the essence, as the essence continued to absorb his mana, the essence then lit up brighter. Ian was then surprised and confused to see that. He was confused why this didn't stop, but he was then shocked and the essence absorbed all his mana. He had never experienced anything like this in the game. The essence that was previously spotlessly clean suddenly turned into a fiery red color after absorbing his mana. Ian could only be shocked to see that, and a very powerful fire magic was then released from the essence which was directed towards the carnivorous tree. Ian also looked overwhelmed in handling the magic that he released because of how powerful it was. But the effect of the magic attack was really very powerful, which made the top of the carnivorous tree disappear. The effect of the release of the fire magic made his eyes hurt. He didn't know that the essence would suck the mana, and not just from the essence. He was confused why this was different from the game, but he then soon realized something. He was used to using a lot of artifacts and magic equipment in the game. He then wondered if it helped him in controlling the absorption mana of the essence. After looking back at the essence he used, he realized that the mana density of this essence was much weaker than before. It was like he used it more than 50 times by putting it into a weapon. But fortunately, it burned well. He also thought he should have tried spells first. Ian then saw the second weakness of the carnivorous trees. He then immediately picked it up. Looking at the burnt tree, he just lamented how unfortunate the tree was and said, "You can rest in peace now." Looking at the smoke caused by the burning of the carnivorous tree, Miguel confusedly asked what exactly happened here. The wall of fire just now. He was pretty sure it was caused by Ian. A voice suddenly sounded from behind him. Miguel then immediately became aware of it. The voice turned out to be from Ian, who immediately headed to their position after finishing his fight. Seeing Miguel, who turned alert and took out his sword, Ian then said that it was him and told him to put away his sword, while Miguel himself was surprised that it was him. Seeing his shabby look, Miguel then asked if he was okay. Hearing that, Ian then asked if he looked okay. He also told him to give him something to clean himself. Ian still felt irritated. This was very unpleasant. He did not expect that the creature would go on a rampage. He also guessed what, because he thrust his sword at its weak point, its head began to fall, which caused a chain explosion. Ending his inner thoughts, Ian then told Miguel to stay there. If something came, he told him to take care of it himself. He would go wash himself. Miguel could only agree to hear that. Ian then walked towards Maeve and Philip. Philip was then surprised when he saw him back, seeing Maeve still lying down. Ian then asked how she was. Philip was confused by Maeve's current state. He had never seen her like this. She was also not sick. He felt that Maeve was poisoned. Ian also felt the same way. Maeve was an apostle, so this could not be dark magic or a curse. Hearing that, Philip suddenly asked Ian to leave this to him. While pulling out his sword, he said, with this, she would be better again in a moment. Ian was then confused to see this and asked what he wanted to do. Philip said he would injure her and extract her dirty blood, so her body could fight the poison. He also told Ian not to worry, because he had done this many times before. Ian could only be dumbfounded to hear that. He also lamented the level of medical knowledge in this dark era. He then told Philip to put away his sword unless he wanted to kill her. Philip could only be confused to hear that. Ian did not explain further and thought he felt something strange and irritating from her left arm. He wondered if it was mana corrupt. Ian then told Philip to open Maeve's left armor, although Philip felt confused, but he then did as he was told, and when her left armor was finally opened, they were then finally able to see the cause of Maeve's bad condition. They could only be surprised to see that. Ian guessed that it must have come from the Deletion, but he felt something was strange. The Deletion should not be able to defend against the holy power. Thinking about the holy power, Ian then realized something. Couldn't he just pray to Rue Solar? She even sent a quest asking him to be her apostle at that time. She seemed to be very interested in him. He really didn't want to do this, but considering the situation, what else could he do? And Ian then cupped his hands. But he was then surprised when a message suddenly appeared in his head when he was about to pray. The message contained, "You can devour it." Ian could only be confused to read that. Based on this feeling, Ian then knew that the message came from the curse of the swamp wrapped around his finger like a ring. Ian then realized that his ring could in fact devour a curse. In the item description it never mentioned anything about this. The same thing happened with the essence earlier. This thing was basically Deletion now, so there was nothing strange when it had the ability to devour a curse. Ian felt that the ring did not want him to take holy power. He was not the only one who hated the gods. Ending his inner thoughts, Ian then told Philip to hold Maeve's hand. Philip understood, but he then confusedly asked what he was going to do. Hearing that, Ian just answered, "Treatment." When Ian held out his hand, Philip was then surprised when he saw the ring in his hand suddenly move. He also asked what it was. Ian replied, "This is his familiar." Philip was then surprised to hear that. Did he say that it was a monster? Only the fallen remained close to a monster. If he used it, the gods will become angry. Hearing that, Ian then immediately interrupted him and asked, "Does he look like a fallen to him?" Philip hesitantly replied, "Not very," but still, not letting Philip finish his words, Ian then put on a threatening face and told him to shut up and hold her hand. If he spoke another word, he would not even be able to imagine what he would do. Philip could only obey. Hearing that, he then immediately held Maeve's hand, and Ian then immediately performed the treatment. As he approached the ring towards Maeve, the ring suddenly jumped towards Maeve's arm, which was contaminated by mana corrupt. The ring then bit and absorbed the mana corrupt. Philip could only be surprised and happy when he saw Maeve's condition, which looked better with the naked eye. The wound had also disappeared. The curse of the swamp also looked satisfied after absorbing all the mana corrupt that contaminated Maeve. Philip did not expect that this monster really healed her. Seeing the state of Maeve, Ian then said that she was free from danger now, but the curse of the swamp suddenly became violent, and seemed to want to pounce towards Philip. Philip was then surprised to see it. He asked what was wrong with it. Ian also saw it, with a threatening look directed at the snake. He then asked, "Why don't you try doing it again?" The curse of the swamp immediately looked scared when it heard that. It then turned tame again, and returned to being wrapped around Ian's finger like a ring. Seeing that, Philip then asked if he was sure it was safe. Hearing that, Ian explained, taming it did not eliminate its basic instincts, just as he couldn't stop talking. Philip could only be silent hearing his ridicule. Ian continued, "Now comes the important part of the treatment," so he told him to shut his mouth and bring him a dagger, bandages and alcohol, and Ian then continued the treatment using first aid skills. A few moments after Ian finished the treatment, Maeve then showed signs of waking up. Philip was then happy to see that. Ian then asked if she was awake. Looking at her arm, which was now bandaged, Maeve said, "You helped me again, Ian." She also felt guilty, even though she was the one who insisted on finding the culprit of the contamination of this forest, but she ended up like this. Hearing that, Ian then said that the culprit is taken care of already. They were then surprised to hear that. Maeve then asks if he handled it alone. Maeve then returned to moping. In the end, everything ended like this again. She then asked him, "You know, I was swallowed by the corrupt mana of the essence, right?" Ian was surprised to hear that. Philip was the same. Ian then asked, "Did she say the dark mage tried to make her corrupt?" Maeve replied no. Strangely, he only sent her a message. He warned her that she had crossed the line, and the Crimson would suffer the consequences. Then he disappeared. Crimson is probably a mage. Find out who he might be able to help them. She also asked him if he had any clues related to it. Hearing that, Ian grinned. He then replied that he was not sure. He also irritably thought that the dark mage figured it out. The next day, in the carnivorous tree that had been burned by Ian last night, Miguel was seen digging the ground nearby. He looked upset at this time. He had said to find the dark mage first, but now he had spare time to find the reason for contamination. He was also annoyed why he had to dig this early in the morning. Hearing his complaints, Ian, who had no idea when he was up in the tree, then said that digging was his specialty. He then told him to dig faster if he had time to complain. He also thought there could be many items around. Seeing the scorched forest around him, Philip could only be amazed. He was amazed that Ian could set a fire of this size and it didn't spread anywhere. Hearing that, Maeve then explained, it was because this forest used to be a forest of fairies. It was difficult to set a fire to a forest of fairies. That's why most kingdoms were built atop a forest of fairies. She suspected Ian might set a fire, knowing that. Philip could only be amazed to hear that, while Ian himself could only be stunned, because he honestly didn't know anything about it. After searching for a while, he was then happy to finally find what he was looking for. He was also happy when he saw that the item did not burn. The item was the seed of the twisted ancient tree. He could get 1 skill point when consuming it, even though it was written like that in the item description. But Ian knew that it was a bait. There was a hidden mission in it. After picking it, Ian then thought not to eat it and keep it in his dimension bag. A shout suddenly sounded from Miguel. They then immediately rushed towards him, and asked what was wrong. Miguel did not immediately answer and told them to look over there. There were bodies under the roots of the tree. Seeing that, Ian then explained, they were sacrifices offered to this tree. Miguel was then surprised to hear that. He then asked if he said the dark mage sacrificed these people to take care of this evil creature. Maeve was also surprised when she heard that. She then realized something, and remembered her discussion with Ian that night discussing the state of her brother. Maeve then came to a very bad conclusion. She even rejected the conclusion as much as possible in her head. She didn't want to believe it would happen. Ian also realized her situation, but then he could only curse.